Understood. Um, I want to connect. When you mentioned authenticity, how authenticity is important, maybe for people, I'm trying to connect that with reality TV, because I feel
Yeah,
like in reality TV, you're just there are cameras and people are just. If I can take the example of Big Brother, and if people watching in India,
right.
Big Boss, it's just a bunch of people who are invited to a house, and so that's the context, but I'm hesitating to bridge
Yeah,
that example properly, because I've also heard that reality TV is kind of scripted, and they probe you to create controversies, and they apparently they tell people as well to you got to play this role. So I'm not entirely sure of the
yeah.
facts of how much of reality TV is quote unquote real, but could that if we make that assumption that it is if we make the assumption that most people who watch reality TV assume that it's real, then is that because of that authenticity that is being displayed, that people think that they're being their authentic selves on TV?
Yeah, I think I think that is a big part of it. I think there's also this. I mean, reality TV is in some ways the big precursor to social media, with this idea that anyone can become famous. Big Brother, obviously, but also the contest shows like American Idol, Pop Idol in England. Uh, Even Survivor is kind of a contest-based show, and the whole early reality soaps, shows that are just shot and following people around in sometimes very mundane places. So an early one in England was one called Driving School, where it was just driving tests and people going in to have driving lessons, and that became a huge thing. So there's been so much of this, and obviously in some ways it's the same thing. People resonate because they appear authentic, but just like social media isn't just necessarily an authentic image of what people are doing, reality TV obviously is that in spades, because it's not just one person or a small team producing content. It's content on an industrial scale, uh, and I think there's, in both cases, I think there is this sense of a kind of recognition of the manipulation, but at the same time, a desire to accept what you're saying as being what really happened. This sense that we are getting intimacy, even when we know that things like confessionals don't exist in real life, and even if you're seeing someone go into a confessional in a show like Big Brother or America's Next Top Model and turning on a camera, there's also a knowledge that this is something that they have obviously been told that they have to do, and that we're expecting because we want that intimacy, we want that authenticity, but it's authenticity that's been crafted, scripted, and then edited in at the right time. There's producers there. We know there's producers there because TV shows have told us this. Producers who are telling them, "Can you reset? Can you say that again? Or can you perhaps say a bit more? Or perhaps can you say it a little bit differently? Because that's what we're going to need." And then they can splice whatever they say in wherever they want to say it. Uh, but I'm always amazed by how many people still think, even though they know this, they still take their favorite reality shows as kind of being what happens. There's a show in England that I actually can't stand, that for years I kept telling people because it's very popular. It's called Gogglebox, and it's basically people watching TV and commenting on what they're watching. And they have a celebrity one too. And then there was this big scandal. It didn't affect the show's popularity in the end, about 2 or 3 years ago, where it was announced that it was largely scripted, and people were like, "Oh, but it just seems so natural." And even with the celebrity ones, I think people just want to think that somebody has just got a small camera on top of their TV and they're just sitting there and they're watching TV and commenting on what they're watching. But it's cheap content. It's become a big franchise for Channel 4, which is a British it's a British TV, national TV network that's available over the air. It's not a cable channel, and it's clearly manipulated. You only have to look at it for 5 seconds to realize everyone is perfectly made up. They're perfectly arranged. The framing is perfect. And obviously, if they're watching channels other than Channel 4, they have to have rebroadcasting consent from other channels to even show the content. But uh, people want to believe. And I think this is, another interesting twist. And there's nothing more ordinary than people watching TV or people going for their driving tests or people just living their daily lives. But reality TV, I think, certainly has become part of this industrialization, this production of celebrity that the media industries need to cope with the sheer number of channels out there, the sheer number of platforms, and the increased demand for relatively affordable content. And it's also helped craft this idea of celebrities as being either the ones who are authentic and likable, even if they don't necessarily do anything specifically, or the ones who, and I think this is an important part of celebrity too, the ones who we sort of love to hate because they don't do anything, and we just think, well, why are they in this position? Why do they have all of this? What makes them a celebrity? Uh, and the celebrities who emerge as talented and charismatic, and then we feel vindicated because this person was nobody 10 weeks ago, and now everyone knows their name because they just appear to be not only talented, but they have that X factor, yet before then they were a college student or they were working in a bank or they were dental hygienists, and suddenly they're on the cover of magazines and they're people who are household names. Uh, and I think the villain edit's also important because I think there is a judgmental side to celebrity. We want to say, is this person worthy of our attention, even as we give it to them anyway? And they become these figures we can discuss in terms of what are ultimately bigger problems in society. So the people like Kim Kardashian, who seem seemingly unworthy of all that they have. The same kind of commentary, I think, has been applied to so many celebrities recently, from uh, the backlash against Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, particularly as fomented by the British press, or even the backlash so many influencers get when they start talking about their mental health because they've been criticized for seemingly just being so privileged and getting attention that they don't deserve. I think this also, there's been the critique also of both Logan and Jake Paul on a similar level. And in some ways, I think that leads to things like trying to prove yourself by doing something like becoming a boxer or setting up your own cosmetics line.
I don't think I would make the argument that there is nothing inherently wrong with reality TV. It feels like how you mentioned, like it feels like a cheap watch time, like a cheap
Yeah.
pastime and a mindless pastime. Um, do you agree with that characterization, or do you think there's fundamentally something wrong with watching reality TV or producing reality TV?
I don't think there's anything wrong with any of it. I don't think there's anything wrong with celebrity. I think these are cultural formations. I certainly watch reality TV, and I watch it for, like everyone else, for a variety of reasons. Some I watch because it's funny, it's camp, and I know that that's half the intention of the producer. But also, I think some of the more successful shows, like the Bachelor franchise in the United States, has been so successful partly because it's been able to incorporate the people who want to believe this is true love and the way they watch it with the people who say this is absolute rubbish. These are all self promoting people who want to become big on Instagram or TikTok, and they have no intention of getting married, and they're watching it for the fun of mocking it, or for just the fascination with what people will do to get famous. I think a lot of shows work on that level. I think there's also ones that are more sincere, and I love, for example, the Great British Bake Off. I think it's a great show. I think they've cast. I mean, I credit them for their casting. They cast. They distinguish themselves from other shows by casting really nice people who are also super talented, who seem to get on well. They present this utopian idea of a multicultural Britain with multiple generations working individually but also together and producing under great pressure things that are magnificent. Even if we can't taste them, we can appreciate the craft that these seemingly ordinary people put into it, and that has given rise to its own sort of celebrities because it becomes a place where nice people do win. And nice people don't just win the show; they win people's hearts. And to a certain extent, I think it works in a sort of counter reality TV mode to say a lot of people are decent, they have hidden talents, and when given a chance, they can excel. And here's a platform for showing that. Uh, I think there are other shows where early cycles, for example, early series of shows like American Idol produced really important, famous musicians because it gave people a platform, but it also, I think, educated the viewer in terms of thinking about what goes on, how it's not just about being able to sing a high note or having a pretty face, but the ineffable other qualities that attracted people to certain contestants and not others. So I think there's those kind of reactions, and there's also the reality TV that's not about the people. There's reality shows that are about things like real estate, where the houses are the stars and the presenters are the stars, where we can see inside worlds we wouldn't experience. There's reality shows that come off and are deliberately playing with the idea of this is just camp. You're watching it to have a laugh, and then surprise people by putting talented people in the spotlight, like RuPaul's Drag Race. And of course, there are the other ones where the sheer pleasure is watching people who are no longer famous, or people who have been famous, or people who still are famous showing their lives. So, going back to, I think in the US, it was probably the first celeb reality shows where people like the Osbournes, Jessica Simpson, and Nick Lachey with Newlyweds. These are all before the Kardashians, and Anna Nicole Smith's show, and each one of them was very different in how it was targeting its its protagonists. The Nick and Jessica one turned them from, you know, up and coming tween stars into major stars in their own right, particularly for her. The Osbournes reinvented them as a sort of family show and made the family famous and humanized Ozzy Osbourne as a sort of this old, slightly doddering father figure. And something like Anna Nicole was just horrific. I don't know if you saw it, but she was clearly very drugged up. She was very overweight, and she was obviously not very much in control of what she was doing. And I think that all of those tendencies now exist in all the channels that show so much reality shows, whether it's MTV or TLC, which is a station in the US that's famous for having just the most bizarre reality shows, whether it's protagonist featured ones, like there's one called The £1,000 Sisters, about two sisters who weigh an enormous amount and are trying to lose weight. Or they'll have other ones that are about big families, polygamists, just all the extreme lifestyles or extreme body types you can think of. And again, it's both playing to an audience who wants to be scandalized, and I think also very strongly to students who want to watch something crazy with their friends and laugh at it. But it's all of these are a long way from things like the Kardashians, for example, who have managed to leverage reality TV and social media into the highest forms of fame, I'd say, in the United States.
um I am able to sympathize with the I don't know about the US, but in India at least, in terms of shows like Big Boss slash Big Brother,
Yeah,
where
yeah,
stars that have been has been like, I mean, who are no longer relevant, who were maybe at one point in time, maybe 5 years ago, who were relevant and who were making, let's say, good movies, or were being cast in multiple movies, but lost their relevance. I have seen them re-entering, let's say, these reality TV shows, just to get that momentum going. And I think
yeah.
a good case example would be Shilpa Shetty, who is
Yes, yes.
yeah, who's an Indian movie star. I
Yeah,
would make the argument that she was not, she lost her relevance, I think, after I think getting married or something. I don't know. But she ended up going on Big Brother, ended up winning the show, if I'm not wrong, or
yeah,
top three, if I'm not wrong. And, her popularity exploded in India post that. it does seem like people use
In the
that
United
as a momentum
Kingdom.
to.
Yeah. I mean, she became famous in the UK too as a result of the whole Big Boss thing, because in England that became a sort of a seminal moment in reality TV because of Jade Goody receiving having because Shilpa Shetty was on Big Brother England. There was Jade Goody, who was a big reality TV star who'd come from nowhere and gone and became very famous through Big Brother. Was not well educated and was particularly racist to her. And so Jade Goody goes on, and you know all this, I'm sure, goes on Big Brother, Big Boss to sort of make up for this and to try and both improve her image in the UK, but also just as a sort of a public apology. And she while she's on the show, she gets a call to say that she's been diagnosed with fairly advanced cancer and has to leave the show. And there's all of this is on camera. The moment where she breaks down and she finds out that she's very sick. I think she was in her mid to late 20s, and she does die as a result of the cancer, which she turns into more reality TV because she's followed in the last months of her life basically as she wants to raise money for her two sons. And also, of course, it rehabilitates her. She becomes sort of this martyr figure. So there's an article I have my students read that's about this, and I think it's one of the things that reality TV does, because again, we're talking about everything from specialized content about chefs and cooking and real estate to people who are just trying to live their lives in front of a camera. It's a massively diverse genre, but this idea that it's embedded in a fame cycle of using it to become famous or to get attention, to using it to have, when you have some fame, to either further develop that fame or nuance that fame at a certain point when you're trying to change the status of your fame. So people who might be trying to change careers in the public spotlight, so moving perhaps from being a social media star to an actor or a singer, might use reality TV in that way. And then also on the downside, people whose fame has peaked, people who are being really dug up from obscurity to have one last chance at fame. This is, and I think part of its attraction is that it sort of works with all these different models. And some of the contest shows like Big Brother obviously are very much involved in this. And there's been formats of Big Brother where they've had people who weren't known who had to come into the house and pretend they were famous and convince famous people they were famous. And the celebrity versions always have this sort of sense of some people are coming in who are on the way up, and other people are only in the house because they're so past their peak of fame. And sometimes they do get a reboot. Other times they just recognize that it's not going to come back. Or if it comes back, it's not going to come back on terms that they can live with.
Right. I mentioned the fame part, but I think there's another flip side to it, which just occurred in the sense that again, this is an Indian example. You may not be able to relate to this,
Yeah.
where there was this famous, at least I would argue she was pretty famous. There was this famous movie star called Rimi Sen, and I think after a point she just was not getting a lot of roles, and so she came to Big Brother, and at the end, I think she made the claim that while inside the house, while arguing, she just made the claim that she's only here for the money, and that I
Yeah.
think the sentiment is that people wanted to see her, and I think the producers knew that people were craving to kind of see her, and because of her TRPs, they would get good TRPs. But she was in it only for the money. I mean, I think she also realized that she could milk a little bit of money from this, and yeah, I mean. While getting thrown out of the house or something, or around that timeline, she didn't even fight for the ejection. I mean, she just said, I don't care if I'm out of the house, I'm just here and for the money, and I don't care what happens to me. So I think there is that flip side where celebrities also kind of take advantage of this, that they know that people want to see them, and for them it's just this who is willing to pay me the highest to for me to be seen. So that, I think, that dynamic
Yeah.
also kind of plays in.
No, and I think it's interesting because I don't know what happened to her, but I would imagine that you could also walk off a show like that saying, I'm only here for the money. And certainly in an English context, then that could actually give you more fame because you had left, and the manner in which you had left would then generate more press coverage, more respect, possibly, and more interest than just staying on the show to the bitter end. And I mean, and with all of these, you also wonder how much is planned in advance in the negotiations with the channels, because a lot of these, reality shows are really, they really are surrounded in a lot of confidentiality. They don't want contracts getting out. They don't want former contestants speaking up too much about decisions that are made. And some, I think, genuinely are, they are what they seem to be. I would imagine something like the Great British Bake Off, which is, I know, has got all these other national franchises. I think a lot of that show would not work if it was known that people had made negotiations behind the scenes to make it to the final five. Whereas with Big Brother, I think if you want certain stars, you're probably going to have to say to them, you can stay till at least this week. We're going to make it worth your while. I've heard that franchises like The Bachelor, similarly, there's certain people who they scout to be on the show, whether they're influencers or people who are allied to something that they find interesting, like somebody who has some kind of renown in sports, for example, if it's a man, where they are told, yes, you will be on the show for 10 weeks. We can guarantee that. We can't guarantee you that you'll win it, but we can guarantee you a prolonged exposure to make it worth your while coming on. Uh, and but in general, I think reality shows know that if we know too much about the production and how and what kinds of conditions people appear under, then the mystique goes. So it's it's usually pretty confidential, and usually when the exposés come out, the shows have long gone. So in this country, in the United States, there was a show that hasn't been on the air for, I think, 4 or 5 years now, but was very successful for a long while, called America's Next Top Model. It became an international franchise. And this year, some of the girls who were on it, and I'm talking probably now 2005, 2009, 2011, divulged the conditions under which the show was shot, including things like the food that they had to buy their own food, they weren't paid, or they were paid a tiny per diem. They were often put in vans and the windows were blocked out and left to wait there for hours so that when they got out of the van, they'd be disoriented. So conditions that were designed to put people in very tense situations and capitalize also upon often very real hunger to use modeling as a way to become famous and to make money. A lot of the cast were often girls from pretty poor backgrounds. So that kind of manipulation obviously led to drama in the house and drama that the show was famous for. And it was all manipulated. The people were chosen in ways that were very manipulative as well. So definitely, I think with reality TV, there's a lot that we don't know about what's going on, even as we kind of probably have a sense that it's somewhat artificial, including who is talented enough to make it through. Sometimes that's even somewhat diagrammed out in advance.
So on the scripting part and on the confidentiality part, I want to paint a different picture. Obviously, what you mentioned at the end about America's Top Model, about putting them in a van and just closing the windows. I mean, that I would regard that as harassment. But if I could just take the example of scripting, I mean, when you mentioned,
Mm.
let's say for Big Brother or for other aspects where you'll be allowed till week X and then you'll be thrown out, and we'll make it worthwhile for you till the time you're there. So I want to contrast such dynamics of the scripting part to WWE, World Wrestling Entertainment, where I think at this point I think it's very I think they don't even try to hide it anymore. They're pretty open about it. Where
Right.
it's I think everybody knows it's scripted. I mean, the match that happens, the titles that go on, everything is scripted to the last detail. Anybody who knows Mr. McMahon knows how detail oriented and how what is that hands on he likes to be. But anyways. But that does not seem to have impacted the popularity of WWE. And I think at this point, I think it's the most popular it has ever been. So, do you think that these reality TV producers are overestimating or underestimating how much? Yeah, I'm not exactly sure which word, but the impact that it would have on the audience. I mean, um, like I would make the argument that people, even if tomorrow all the producers come out and say everything is scripted, I don't think people would care. I mean, they might care for 2 days on Twitter, but on the third day, I think they'll be glued to their TV sets back again. Is that fair, or
Yeah.
how do you think about it?
I think it's fair. I think there are some shows where perhaps it would be against the brand. So I'm just picking Great British Bake Off because its brand image is integrity, talent, a sense of justice as part of the show. There are the moments of controversy in the show have been moments where something that seems to be unjust has happened. So when somebody used somebody else's ingredient by accident, and that caused a huge controversy because it then affected the judging. But I think in general, for most shows, I think people like The Bachelor, people would probably shrug their shoulders and after a while and say, "I still want to watch it because it's fun," or so I think some people would say, I don't believe it. It seems so real. I can't believe this. I don't want to believe it. So I'm just going to carry on and and accept it for what it is. Uh, I think also, this is the case with pretty much everything we watch. We know it's crafted for us. We know that this isn't innocent, that somebody had to, even just from going back to the example of having social media, we all know that we don't post the worst photographs and that sometimes things come out really well by accident, but other times people are going to sit there. I know my students do. They're not going to post a raw photo. They're going to filter it. And so there is this knowledge that in producing something, you're going to need light. You're going to need to point the camera in a certain way. People are going to need to be made up. And you're going to be discarding content that you've created just because it doesn't fit. So that's we know that has to be the case with everything, but we still sit there and watch a film and are fascinated by what goes on in the storylines. We still listen to music with an understanding that maybe this is 40 tracks that have been mastered and auto-tuned, but we want to hear it as just some kind of spontaneous expression of emotion and sentiment or joy. So I don't think it would make much difference to most formats. I think there are key ones where it would be a problem. The example I'm going to use here is a few years back, so I think it may show how we've changed. But there was a reality show that was called The Hills that was huge in the late tens, late like 2008, 2011, around that period. And it was a massive show in America, and it was about a group of college students who hung out in Beverly Hills and had good internships and went to nice clubs and dressed well and had romantic intrigue. And towards the end of the show's success, the characters had become so famous. People were commenting, it's really odd that Lauren Conrad can walk down the street and there aren't people following her, and that she can just walk into a restaurant or a shop and be served. So people kind of knew that this couldn't be their real lives that they were leading. And then the final episode of the final show, they had them posing against a backdrop. It was just a landscape, and they pulled it away, and you saw the studio. So you saw everything behind them. So it was basically a tacit acknowledgement that everything you'd been saying for the whole season, several seasons, had all been made up, and people were furious. They just hated the fact that they'd been conned, even though they it was pretty obvious after a while that this was just scripted television.
I think in that case, I think because they led on people to believe that what they were watching was true, and at the end, they kind of lifted that veil. I think people felt
Yeah,
deceived by that. Um,
yeah,
if they were, I think, from the get go, if they were like, all this is fake. If you want to watch it or not, like, maybe
yeah.
people would be more sympathetic. But I mean, it's a paradox, right? I mean, if they would have done that, we don't know if people would have watched. So I don't know. So maybe, yeah.
And I think also today we may, I don't want to use the word sophisticated. I don't think we're any more sophisticated, but I think we're more aware of media manipulation because we have to involve, I mean, even down to in COVID, people having classes on Zoom or Google Meets and people deciding to buy circle lights for their Zoom calls, or putting on, doing the touch up filters, choosing backgrounds. This all became part of just everyday interactions.
Um, I want to touch on audience demographics. Um, so the way I want to put this, the way I want to set this up is, I feel like generally people who watch reality TV are hesitant to kind of. I'll give you my example. So if I watch a reality TV, it's highly unlikely that I might share it in public. Like I may not be willing to admit that I watched, let's say, Big Boss or Big Brother in public. I may disclose it with my to my closest friend, but I may not probably advertise the fact that I'm watching. I'm streaming 20 hours of reality TV. I want to extend this example from me to the general audience, and you can maybe assess whether it makes sense or not. Where a lot of people seem to be watching it slash on maybe watching it slash mocking it or slash commenting on it or slash interested on it slash hating on it, but reality TV in general seems to be very popular. I mean, even though a lot of people who you might meet in daily life may say that, who watches that crap, and that crap is for idiots, or it sucks, and you would watch something else. But it seems like the behavior that they exhibit on the outside is very inverse to what they actually do. Is that fair, or do you think I'm exaggerating a little bit?
I think it's fair, and I think it depends on how you define reality TV. Because I think this is where some people will say, "Oh, I don't watch reality TV," but then they might watch something like The Great British Bake Off, or they might watch Master Chef, or they might watch something that's on a channel like HBO that is more elevated, but still fits within the reality genre. So I think it's so pervasive, partly because it's cheap compared to a lot of other types of programming, but also because you can do reality on anything. There could be a reality show that we might think of as not being that much different from a fly on the wall documentary in a hospital. There's shows like that in England. I don't think there are in the United States, where people could say that they're watching it because it's the real life drama and an insight into the decisions, the ethical decisions that have to be made in a high pressure workplace, and justify what they're watching as a documentary as opposed to reality TV, which might be something on their end that's more like watching Big Boss, Big Brother, Survivor, some pop idol, making the band, any of those many, the X Factor. Uh, so I think there are these distinctions. A friend of mine would sometimes talk about quality reality television, and she would use the channels as being part of the where were they broadcast. If they were broadcast on certain channels, they were already in this sort of space that was semi-elevated, semi-important, knowledgeable, whereas other channels and other platforms specialized in more trashy escapism. Uh, so I think it's in some ways like all kinds of entertainment. But yeah, I mean, people have always had guilty pleasures, and then there's also the other side of it where it's if you can have a camp sensibility, you can frame the guiltiest things as something that are actually fairly elevated, because it takes someone really intellectual to see the pleasures of my 600-pound life, and to take it from its context and turn it into something else.
Are you familiar with this TV show called? I think it's called The Rehearsal by Nathan.
I don't think so.
Okay, when you mentioned quality reality TV show, I kind of thought of that. It was I haven't watched it yet, but it was anyways, I'm digressing. Doesn't matter. but
Yeah.
all right.
No. I
Uh,
think these things, I think there are plenty of them. I think there's whole stations that have specialized. Even some of Netflix's content here, they have reality shows, including ones I think it's called Next in Fashion, where they have respected guests in the industry. They have people with degree level skills and their own businesses. The challenges aren't based on making them do something that's impossible in the time, but rather more in terms of of looking at the artistry and craft involved in constructing something, that we could say, well, that's not reality TV in the same sense as a load of drunk teenagers in a house trying to be models.